4chan got hacked and they're on the feds' payroll, as evidenced by their internal records. So, fork found in kitchen, water is a liquid. The original Broadway production of Dreamgirls was robbed for Best Musical by 9 of all shows. You know, things we know. This is the part that is worth talking about. For quite a while online, I have been one of the many people screaming about the internet being the real frontier against domestic terror. I wrote an entire piece that is very well researched about it called Into the Ethernet, How Terror is Shaping the Internet and Thus the World. I encourage everyone to read it. It is free on that deep. But I want it to be top of mind for people after this leak because it doesn't just affirm the fact that we know that the feds are running PSYOPs, operations, tree-letter agency shit on civilian populations, which they've gotten like clearance to do so since, again, Patriot Act 02, Homeland Security Act of 03. A lot of people are just now realizing a lot of laws are theoretical, and that was, you know, calcified after 9/11. And what I want to keep to mind to people is the other things that connect to that, right? You have the government orchestrating domestic psyops toward extremism, and specifically far-right extremism, at the same time that this country for the last like 5 or 6 years down in ATL have been perfecting RICO cases. You remember 2-ish years ago I caught on here and I yelled asking people to pay more attention to what was happening with Stop Cop City, because 61 people initially, 59 at some point, were being indicted and charged on RICO cases related to domestic terror and incitement of violence for running bail funds that got protesters out, for organizing or being at protests and demonstrations, and for being at the adjacent music festival taking place the same day that these events occurred. And I was imploring people to understand why these things are all happening relatively around the same time as like 35 plus proposed cop cities and such. And I saw a great video this evening by Zay Lewis, I think is his name. He will be in the caption, talking essentially about the fact that TikTokers are next when it comes to political dissension, which is also something I've been talking about on here, especially since the election. And I just wanted to bring it top of mind to people in the sense that not only have they perfected a way to mass indict and persecute people for political dissension under threats or perceived threats of foreign or domestic terror, they're also inducing literal terror groups that are becoming like a part of your legislature. That's worth noting. But also, I want people to know the consent that they needed to manufacture for political dissenters to be imprisoned, especially if you're talking about people on the left, as people so liberally use the term. No, you know, I see the irony in that. Like, the election and all of the conversations after it is proof of how ingratiated a lot of people are with like crime and punishment. I was one of the only people to note that the fact that all of the conversations that have happened since the election have been very extreme in response only when the people who others didn't appreciate the election discourse of are involved in that mess that's relating to this. We just saw a very public, you could call it scandal if you like, happen with someone who was considered like a big leftist creator that people were like actively celebrating happening because of this discourse. So when you look at like political dissension, them disappearing people regardless of citizenship, not that it should matter, which is why I was telling you FBA and ADOS hoes, the 14th Amendment, right, you're not as safe as you thought you were. Like, I just want people to see how all of this is connected and how in a large capacity they have manufactured your consent by inducing a lot of internal beef with people who could otherwise be coalescing together. Amani, shout out Crushes and Spice, ages ago, I want to say over a year ago, before the election, made a video saying after the election, if the results didn't go the way that Democrats wanted, they would further subsume themselves into like the rights politic, including their voter base. And I think this is a perfect example of that, where you have people post-election really drawing lines in the sand to say that like progressives and liberals and Democrats are being weighed down by the extremism and radicalness of leftist politics that don't really have a main stage, otherwise social media democratized audiences that otherwise you would not have. There is no communist network you can look at on cable TV. There's no socialist network you can look at on cable TV. Here in the US, that is for a reason. And so I just want people to see how all of this is connected, how you had seemingly out of nowhere all of these people deciding like very strong assertions about the left around the same time that RICO cases were taking place and have been getting perfected in this country, doing things too that are very like loosey-goosey with the First Amendment. I was one of the only people who did not find the YSL case funny, in part because I said it was very concerning that all of the judges, because it had a turn of hands a few times, permitted lyrics, despite them typically being covered by the First Amendment, by saying that as long as the prosecution could prove its relevance to the case, they can use lyrics. Like, that's an active violation of the First Amendment during RICO cases that have been taking place for the last 5-6 years that everybody was like kikiing about because they were playing lifestyle in the courtroom. So I just want people to see, you know, the web, the way that they're connected, the fact that the internet has always been the battleground for a lot of your rights since honestly the late 90s, and that the groups that they want you to get off of the internet so that you can keep access to it, hoes, queer folk, abortion providers, etc., are the people you should be coalescing with. And that maybe the same country that is actively running psyops to funnel people into the far right to lead us here could also be sowing dissent in smaller communities that they have always had a hand in the pot of. I'm looking at the Shade Room. I'm looking at No Jumper. I'm looking at everything Barstool Sports does. So, you know, keep it all top of mind. It's important right now.
They're going to come for the TikTokers. And I know that sounds very self-involved as someone who at various points has had like a relative amount of buzz on this platform. But I really think they will. And I think if there were ever a relevant indicator, it was the way that TikTok capitulated so hyperbolically, was just kowtowing at the feet of the administration at the top of the year. Because let's face it, leftist thought in this country does not have a platform on major news networks, not in a substantial way, etc., etc. The place that leftist thought is able to reach the masses is on this platform and platforms like it. In 2020, along with help from some other folks, I wrote a plea for asylum for refugee status for Black Americans, which I think some people took as extremely dramatic. But, you know, the argument I was basically making kind of underlined why I did not feel it was dramatic whatsoever. And time has only proven, I feel like, that sentiment generally, even beyond the scope of Black Americans, truer and truer. Like, yes, in theory, a blanket request on the part of the administration to change the nature of algorithms on any given social media platform or shadow ban certain creators is a slick way to accomplish the goals. But I think they're getting comfortable. They're getting more comfortable. And as they get more comfortable, I think they'll get more direct, as evidenced by the things that they are doing right now. And it's clear to everyone, it seems, that this is not the end. This is not the full extent of what they plan to do when it comes to suppressing political dissidents. I also think, speaking for anyone who's in the United States right now, our perspective, no matter how clear it may be, is still warped by being here. You know, I have a friend who left the country a few years ago for these exact reasons, because we've been talking about this for years. And he's texting me with an urgency that, like, I'm registering, but I can't fully absorb. Like, I have friends in Denmark who are texting me with similar urgency about the state of this country. And I don't know. It's starting to feel like, especially if you are very vocal and or active about your opinions politically in this country, and they are too far left, you are in a precarious situation right now, as so many others are, simply by nature of their immigration status or a number of other factors, their sexuality, their gender. But yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. It's by no means me encouraging people to stop speaking loudly about the things that matter to them. In fact, it's quite the opposite. But I think it's a call for awareness and preparedness. And, you know, you hear a lot of that sentiment now. It's like, yeah, we need to get ready, but it's very unclear what people mean by that. I think the problem with a paternalistic government system is like, it's, you know, like a parent beating a child. It's like, parents should not beat children. But at what point does this child living in a system that tells you to respect and honor your parents decide, actually, I'm about to slap you back? You know, that's like, there's a barrier there that I think allows the aggressing or aggressor to carry out violence up to a point that is unreasonable in any other context.